Welcome, welcome, welcome back to AG University Podcast. It is I, your professor and lead dancing unicorn at Anna Grace Newell on all major platforms, and now at AG University Podcast on Instagram and TikTok as well for your daily dose of angel readings, manifestations, somatic practices, dance movements, just really a plethora of things. Whatever's lighting me up these days, I'm sharing it. So I'm so happy you're here. This is a school from the cosmos, a school of intuition, a place to land and reconnect with your inner being, your inner goddess, your inner intuitive voice, which ultimately will connect you with your soul's purpose. And that is really what I do. I specialize in helping people find and recalibrate and connect with their soul's purpose. And however that feels best for you or however that shows for you, I am a clairvoyant medium, Akashic Records practitioner, and intuitive guide. I dabble in a lot of things. And as always, my newsletter is linked in every episode show notes. If you want to connect with me deeper about the Akashic Records, one-on-one readings, reading giveaways, also any type of collective group work that I'll be doing in the future, everything is there in the newsletter. Always, I promise I will never spam you. It's a gentle newsletter, and I like to send out channeled messages. I try to do a monthly update by newsletter and just share with you guys kind of what's going on in the ethers. And that way you can feel connected to your angels and hope that it inspires you to connect in with your higher self or your angels. We all have them. We all have the ability to tap into our Akashic record, our Akashic line. It is just a database of infinite wisdom, infinite guidance that is available to everyone. And thank you for allowing me to be a conduit and to hold this safe space, because we are all here to explore the universal language of love. That is the purpose of this lifetime. So I'm so happy you're here. Class is in session. Today, I'm going to be talking a bit more about relationship stuff, which is fitting because if you guys do not know, I'm getting married in the fall. So I have been doing, I feel a lot of shifts happen dramatically before weddings. It's really interesting. Like all of my friends who are married say that has happened for them. And it usually shows up in some category, whether it's like financial shift, career shift, friendship shifts, like friendship breakups, or for me, it was definitely a health was really magnified for me going into the wedding season. So weddings are super powerful. They're super potent. And it's very interesting to be in this portal where I'm really being forced to look within myself so deeply. But I know that it's just all part of the process and getting me prepared to, like, quite literally, it's like if I posted a TikTok the other day about this, how I feel that weddings are such a powerful ceremony. Like, I'm like, yo, this is like some really ancient witchcraft or something. Like, it's like a soul binding ceremony where you have witnesses and there's all these elements. And, the bride's wearing white. And it feels very, yeah, like a ritual or like a rite, but in a really beautiful way. I always tell people the word witch only means a wise woman, which is why I love the word witch. But I know for some people it makes them, feel uncomfortable. But I think it's really good for women to tap into their kind of witchiness, because we are wise women. And at one point it was frowned upon. But oftentimes witches were the modern kind of medicine women of a community. They were the healers. They were here to spread love and heal and connect. So, weddings kind of fall in that category for me. I feel like they're just a really powerful portal day, like a really powerful heart opening ceremony. That was what I was trying to say. Heart opening ceremony. It's oftentimes when you go to a wedding, when you go to a good wedding where the vibes are right and the couple is like madly in love, and you leave just feeling like you're just so swept away in the energy of how lovey dovey it was. That is a heart opening ceremony. So I hope that you guys have experienced that feeling, because it is really magical. And that's, of course, the type of wedding that I'm manifesting for Austin and I. And in the meantime, I am headed to Tennessee. By the time this episode goes live, I'll be in Tennessee for a good bit of time, catching up with my family. We're going to be seeing the solar eclipse. We're actually all collectively as a family going to our family's spring river house so that we can really see the eclipse, because I guess we're going to be in a good line of sight. I'm not actually sure how that's going to physically appear, but it'll be really fun to gather and to witness the eclipse together as a family. My dad is very into stars and astrology, as as I, and my mom and my sister are just along for the ride. So it'll be really fun. But I'm going to be doing a bit of wedding planning, some of the more tasking situations, like addressing save the dates. And you guys know it's a lot of details. I'm really not a good details girly, but I guess this is a good lesson for me to put more focus and being more intentional when it comes to details, planning events. I'm really fortunate. My mom and my sister are really enjoying the wedding planning process. So I have a lot of help on top of we have a wedding planner. Austin literally last week was like, I didn't even know we had a wedding planner. I thought your mom and your sister were just doing it. I was like, no, we absolutely have all three. But it still somehow is, it's just, it's a lot of work. But I am going to get rewarded. And I have my bridal shower in Nashville with all my besties. So I have 11 bridesmaids, and then my sister is my maid of honor. So it's going to be a really fun time. We're going to be dressed up in little silly hats and yeah, just have a tea party, have a girl stay. And I really miss all my girlfriends. So it'll be really fun to see them. So that'll be kind of the light at the end of the tunnel of, addressing and sending out mail and sifting and sorting all of the details, but I'll have a nice little party day. So I've got a couple of really fun guests coming on in Nashville, and also I'll be guest speaking on a few podcasts while I'm there too. So, it'll be nice to have a little change of scenery. I've actually been in Florida. This is the longest I've been in Florida consecutively. So, okay, that's just a little bit of wedding and life updates. But the reason I'm sharing all this with you guys is yes, I am getting married in the fall. And I had a friend of mine. I went and saw her last time I was home at Memphis, and her mom is one of the best divorce attorneys in Memphis, which I know, divorce, yikes, we don't want divorce. But she gave a lot of good advice, and she said, these are the top 5 reasons that people get divorced. And also, I feel like it could be applicable. Maybe you haven't even met your person. Still good to know. Still great for when the time comes. Also, reasons people break up. And I just, even though it sounds, maybe kind of like depressing to talk about getting divorced, because obviously we don't want to get a divorce. I would be really sad if Austin and I got divorced. But also, if it's someone listening who has been divorced, no shame there. I am someone that is so like, people come into our life and we have a soul contract, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen for our highest and greatest good. So there is no shame around divorce on this podcast. But I know whenever I'm like, I'm getting married, let's talk about divorce, people are like, hey. But I just thought it was kind of an interesting take, because I always love to be a catalyst for conversation with you and your partner in any capacity, where you could talk about some of these, maybe more difficult topics to approach. Let me be a reason. Be like, oh, I was listening to this girl, Anna Grace, and she told me to ask you these questions. Like, blame it on me. Use me. I will be the guinea pig. I have run Austin through the majority of these questions. But still, it's just kind of interesting topics to put in your ear holes from, someone who's a really successful divorce attorney. And she's like, these are the same things I see over and over and over again. And I truly believe that anybody in any partnership, you can always continue to manifest a new level of love, a new level of growth, of expansion in any partnership, no matter what, as long as you're both open and committed to one another. Like, none of these topics that I talk about are going to be anything that's going to like throw you for a loop or anything like that. And even if you just have awareness now, you don't have an answer, you can take time to think about it. Think about how you want to show up in your relationship, because I am someone who always wants to prepare my future self to be in alignment with my higher self. And so does Austin. And we are very much, we don't have all the answers. Like, I'm not someone sitting here saying, we've got it all figured out. No, we've been together for like 3 years. There's people who've been together way longer. My parents have been married for 40 years. So I have had them as a good example as well. Just seeing things that have worked in their marriage and seeing things that, they probably would have wished they had done differently. So I think, this is just kind of a nice, wholesome, holistic view of relationship turbulence that could be avoided with a few conversations on the front end. How about that? So this was my friend Whitney, who I actually used to work with. She sent me this piece of paper. I'm going to read you guys the piece of paper that was like, it's like written on the back of a check stub from her mom, who was this top divorce attorney. And when she got engaged, this was the first thing that her mom presented to her, which I was like, LOL, that's such a like divorce attorney mom. She's like, congratulations on your engagement. Now here are these topics you need to run by your husband or your fiance. Here's what needs to be discussed. It just kind of made me giggle. But you know what? My parents are also very logical like that as well. Like, they'll say stuff that I'm like, oh, why would y'all ever ask that of me and Austin? Oh my gosh, that was so like morbid. And they're like, honey, it's just like, don't take it so personally. It's just, we're being, logical. And I'm like, oh, me. So parents, they're just looking out. But this is what she said. She said, number one is money. Money has been one of the top reasons that people have come into her office, and split was the first. The second one is sex. The third one is children. The fourth one is in laws. And the fifth one is religion. Those were her top five most repetitive patterns for her clientele. Granted, I'm sure one or two could differentiate amongst your life experience, but I think that's a pretty good snapshot of things that I'm going to just run through today and give you guys a couple of ideas or questions to discuss with your partner. This is what she said. If a couple strongly disagrees on two or more of these issues, they need to get counseling before marriage. If you don't, a divorce is inevitable. I see this every single day. So that kind of made me laugh. She says, if you disagree on two or more, and I think every couple is going to have like one area that's more of a pain point. But if you're like, okay, out of those five, three we don't agree on, you're like, well, maybe we could, maybe we need to have a mediator and talk that through. And I'm very pro. Austin and I've been to couples therapy before, for different, not this type of conversation, but I'm very pro. Like we had a couple sessions and it was great, and we didn't feel like we needed to go back. It could be one of those that you could just take an issue to and be like, hey, we need a mediator to walk us through this, and then you have it figured out and it's settled and you understand each other's perspective. And it's not something that you have to like commit like 2 years to figure it out. I'm someone who's very practical about going to therapy and couples therapy. It's not like this is a lifetime commitment you're agreeing to. Okay, so basically for the first one, money. She said if accounts are separate versus together, who pays for what, etc. Having clarity around your finances. So let's just talk about that for a second, because yes, money is a hot topic, but everybody that tunes into AG University podcast is just going to be a manifesting wizard by the time I'm done with you. So you're never going to have to worry about it, because we are abundant creatures inherently. I believe that. And you are all worthy of abundance on many, many scales. So for Austin and I, actually, we could even go back to my mom and dad, who have been married for 40 years. They have always had separate finances, completely separate. Like I said, this is not right or wrong. This is just me sharing my experience and like what Austin and I are going to do, because I already am aware that I have very different spending habits than Austin. And also I am someone that just really, y'all have heard me talk about it. Like I don't really believe in a strict, super strict budget. That really got people up in arms, mostly on TikTok and other places. Not you guys, because I think y'all understood what I was saying. Is that like I don't want to count every single cent, because it starts feeling obsessive, like counting calories or being so strict on everything. Now Austin is very, very strict on. He knows exactly what's going on, what's going in and out all the time. And that's great. And that works for him. However, there has been times in his career where he was like, when he said he was first got started out in his coaching career, when you're like a scrub of a scrub, you're like an assistant to an assistant, and he was making $800 a month. So the man has like really been all over the spectrum on having like absolutely no money. And obviously now he has a job that supports our lifestyle, but I am someone who's like so big picture. I'm like, I just know money's always flowing to me. Wee. And he's like, okay, so I can't quite meet you there. We'll get him there. He'll get there one day. But he's on his own journey. Alas, we don't view money the same. And I know that. And I'm totally aware of that. And also, I will invest in certain things in health or, self-care or anything that I know is in alignment with my highest version of self. I'm not afraid to spend that money. And I was like, I don't really want him to be like, hey, we have a shared account. Why are you spending, $400 a month on acupuncture and massages? And I'm like, hey, that's important to me. He that's a bad example. He gets that. But you know what I'm saying? I just was like, I don't ever want to have to like run anything by him, because I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And that's just how I am. And so here's the thing. I already know that about myself. I'm very aware. And we are definitely just going to have separate finances. I'm also not taking his last name. That's more of a business. I've paid thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to heavily brand the name Anna Grace Newell. And so I'd have to completely change all of my domains, change a lot of things. And honestly, my mom didn't change her last name. So I think it's just been really normalized for me. My mom and I do not have the same last name. Her last name is Shepherd, and I'm a Newell. And it was never an issue growing up. And she was a highly successful, self made woman. So maybe that just inspired me. I don't know. But it's kind of another thing, too. Like she always said, me and your father, she was always like, that's some of my best advice to you is don't mix your finances when you can help it. I know some people have a different situation, but it is nice that we have an agreement on, obviously, we're going to split our mortgage, and we know that Austin pays for this stuff and I pay for that. And like we have a really good understanding. And that's kind of how my parents were. Like, she's like, your father always paid for your tuition, and I paid for your lifestyle and your sports and your clothes and all your Christmas presents, which, let's be real, all that stuff probably ended up really adding up to be a lot. But you get what I'm saying, is that as long as you are aware of, okay, we're going to meet in the middle and you pay for this and I pay for this. And you can even get really like specific with it and be like, technically 30% of your income would be this amount. So this area of spending feels good for you, and this area of spending feels good for me based off of your income. You can make it super fair. Like even if you split rent with someone and one of your partner or you make significantly higher amount of money, just break it down into a percentage of like, okay, this is actually a fair percentage that I should pay versus you. It doesn't always have to be 50-50 down the middle. Austin and I just really try to be conscientious of, how can we support each other? But yeah, I have my own bank account, own credit card. When we get married, I'm not really sure why we would need to, but if we ever needed a joint card for something, like we're open to getting, a joint credit card here and there. But like I'm staying at my bank, he's staying at his bank. He's got all of his own stock portfolio. I've got my portfolio. And at this point, I just feel like it'd be a lot of work and kind of confusing to like mix them all up. So, and my parents were like, we always kept everything separate, and they've been married for 40 years. Seems to have worked out really nicely for them. Okay, so let's move on to sex, a topic I love to talk about. I just love to make a sweet little Austin blush, though. He's always like, oh no, what is she going to say? But I really do think that being at least on the same wavelength of your relationship with sex is important with your partner, understanding one, that you are free to speak your needs clearly. That's a big lesson in itself for people, speaking your needs, and also understanding your partner's needs. Like at your core level, understanding each other's needs is like when it comes into the sexual realm. Because I remember when Austin and I first got together, I kept being like, how would you describe your relationship to sex? And he's like, I literally don't even like know what that question is. Like he was so confused. And I'm like, like how do you feel about like literally your relationship with sex? Like what does it look like in the past? And here's the thing, I'm not saying let's not dig up past lovers. Okay, we're not doing that. But just, when do you typically reach for sex? Like what does that look like for you? Like do you typically feel comfortable? Do you feel confident? Do you like to talk about it? Does it make you uncomfortable? Were you raised where there was shame around sex? Don't have sex before marriage, or sex is bad, or like literally what was the narrative? What was your story around sex? That is so important to understand, because you've got to remember, we've got to be so compassionate with each other. We grew up in very different places, with different religions, with different parents, with all sorts of different dynamics. We are not going to 100% see eye to eye on all of these topics, and that's okay. But we're a team and we're going to work together, like you just got to think of it in that lens. And just because you don't see eye to eye right now doesn't mean that you won't see eye to eye, but it does take a little bit of conversation. So I remember I asked Austin, I was like, how would you describe your relationship to sex? And he was literally like, I literally don't know even like what that question is. But here's the thing, your partner might be more evolved than Austin was at that time when I asked. And that's a great question to start with. Did your parents talk about sex as a kid? Was it like a hush hush thing? Was there shame around it? Was there like, oh no, it's, don't do that till you're married? Was it accepted? Did you talk about it? I really did not talk about sex much in my family. Like it was just kind of an awkward topic. However, I did grow up with a mom who always said having a healthy sex life is really important. And I stand by that and I believe that, so it wasn't frowned upon. It just wasn't like we talked about it a lot. And also, I think when you're like a teenager, you're like, I don't really want to hear about my parents' sex life. And then that's not like what I'm trying to get at. But I think it's just like getting to know your partner and understand what was the narrative around sex. What was the dialogue? Like for me, I went to an all girls Catholic school. Of course, they're promoting like wait until you're married to have sex. And honestly, I can't even remember all the things that I heard about sex because I've done so much like rewiring around my own relationship with intimacy. And I've had a lot of people that I've come into contact recently, like on a retreat, and just a lot of women who are now in really happy, healthy partnership. And we all want to kind of define what sex looks like because, yeah, there was a point where I was single and I was out there whiling. But when I was having sex with those people, it's obviously different than the type of sex that I want to have with my husband. So it's never too late for you to re-establish what your needs are in a sexual capacity. And when I even say sex, I always tell Austin that that doesn't just mean like literal penetration. I want to put that under the umbrella of intimacy, right? That could be cuddling. That could be like, let's just like as a whole kind of zoom out and talk about intimacy. Like I need a lot more physical touch and just like intimate connective time that's outside of sex than Austin does. His love languages are different. And that was another thing. I want to give you guys a couple of other tips like learning your love language. I've talked about it before on this podcast, but it really is so important because it really did make me understand that just because Austin isn't like waking up in the morning and just like cuddling me like a little teddy bear that I want to be every single day doesn't mean that he doesn't love me. Like I think you have to just, it's the same thing, learning their relationship with intimacy. Like even like, did they come from a lovey-dovey family or not? Like maybe if someone doesn't grow up in a family that's as like huggy and smushy as like me and my sister were like, we slept in the same bed basically until I was like 11 or 12. Like we were obsessed with each other. Like we wanted to like hold hands every night when we were going to sleep. And I love her so much and she's my best friend. Not a lot of people grew up like that. Okay. So, it's just like a funny example of how you've got to really just zoom out and be like, not everyone is going to be like me. And that's a huge conversation that Austin and I have had. Like, he's like, I'm not going to do everything that you're going to do, and you're not going to do everything that I'm going to do. And it doesn't mean that one of us loves each other less or, feels connected less because like we prefer to connect in different ways. And that was such a big turning point. And learning our love languages was huge. So that's another one just in the sex and intimacy category. So first, getting familiar with, your partner's upbringing. What was the narrative around sex? What's their relationship like with sex now? How has it evolved? I'm sure at one point we all had our kind of like wilding out phase. Not everyone. Honestly, I think that's epic. But me, I had a wilding out phase. I definitely have had sex with people that I'm like, could have done without that, but I did, and that's okay. And now I'm in a place where I want to completely have like a different kind of sex than I've ever had in my entire life. And even going into marriage, I think that even changes your sexual intimacy because, yeah, it's just different. It's a different level of connection and you're always deepening your connection. That's always what we're working towards. So I think another question that I always say is just like asking your partner, what is what's an average frequency that you feel comfortable having sex per week? Like those are things you need to know. That goes into what is their sexual needs and what are your sexual needs, and not being afraid as a female to use our throat chakra and to announce what it is that we need. And also, we as women, we are the sensual, sexual goddess creatures. Like we have to lead sometimes. Men are, they're pretty literal at times. I don't want to stereotype all of them, but they can be logical. Love that about Austin. But sometimes I've got to be the one that's like, no, I actually want this, or I want to slow this down, or I want it to be like this. And like, that's really what females are here to like open that throat chakra and to express ourselves and our sensuality and our needs. And that's such a beautiful part. It's what makes us feminine and juicy and like ripe. That's what I love. I'm like, yeah. So another thing, asking what is the frequency? What do you feel comfortable? Where's our scale? Do you need sex every day? Do you only want to have sex on the weekends? Weekdays, you feel more stressed? When you are stressed, do you want to have more sex or less sex? Like that way your partner just starts to know like, oh, she's stressed right now. She doesn't just not love me, right? Like we start kind of creating a dialogue around how we're feeling emotionally. And when we feel that way emotionally, this is how our sexual needs are expressed or maybe not expressed. And that's something that we can work on together. So I really do feel like if you can just crack the door on having some of those conversations, you don't have to have all of these at once, but it really will make you understand each other so much better. And if you can go into something, and before you even enter marriage, at least having a little bit of verbiage. Like I said, your partner might not have all the answers. Sometimes I'll ask Austin a question. He's like, I literally don't know how to answer that. And I'm like, that's okay. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to push it. You don't have to get an answer, but at least plant the seed of awareness and having some mindfulness or intention around, this is what I want our sexual practice to look like, you know? So those are just like a few of the questions. And then I've spoken on this on a podcast before, but while we're here, time of day, when do you feel is like your optimal time? Are you a morning person? Are you a nighttime person? Like, when do you feel you enjoy sex the most? Because you also want to check in with yourself and ask, like, when do I feel you're meant to enjoy sex? It's meant to be a pleasurable, enjoyable experience, right? It's not something that we just want to like check off our to-do list. It's meant to be a very deep connective experience. So how can we make that as fun and sensual and sexy and loving, or whatever word, you can pick a word, and it ebbs and it flows. It's not always going to look like that, but you can still meet in the middle and say, how could we work towards that? You can always work and grow and evolve in intimacy categories, and you're meant to. It's not going to be perfect. I don't know anyone that has a perfect relationship when it comes to some of that more vulnerable. It's a vulnerable space. That's what it is. And I think that's why sometimes men can struggle articulating. When I ask Austin some of these questions, he's like, I don't know how to answer that, is because, he's still getting comfortable with being that vulnerable and that raw with certain sides of himself. Because, like I said, it's like a lot of people in the beginning have sex that's like performative. It's like very like, this is what I've done with everyone, kind of performative, rah. And then it's like you start breaking down the walls, and then it becomes way more connective and deep and soul binding. And you're not having that kind of sex with just a bunch of random people. So it changes, and there's all kinds of different sex that we actually have and are capable of having. So it's a vulnerability, and it's vulnerable to have these conversations. But like I said, good to just have awareness. And if your partner doesn't have an answer, that's okay. It's okay. And if you don't have an answer, maybe you're like, I don't know, no one's ever asked me that. One day, at least now, the seed has been planted and you will know. So all things intimacy is really important. And then one other thing in this category is Austin and I read the book Attached together. And I can't remember if I've talked about it on the podcast or not. My friend Kiki also came on the podcast and she referenced that book. And that was a really pivotal moment in our relationship, because we discovered some patterns that we both experienced via that book. Honestly, the book gives like a bunch of examples. It was crazy. It was based right after we got engaged. Actually, a couple people brought that book up, just kind of in my world. And I was like, oh, I want to read it. And Austin, for some reason, we both bought a copy, and we were like, okay, we're just going to read it. But it was very interesting because we were able to learn that, obviously when we're in our optimal self, like we're operating in a secure attachment, like both of us are very secure people. But when certain situations arise, oftentimes people can be triggered. And that's really like an inner child trigger that can lead you into the two other attachment styles, which is avoidant or anxious. And it's very common for, you to have a moment where you're triggered and, you're having like an anxious attachment, or, you're worried about something or whatever. And I find that actually, I don't want to say just men, but I do think from just the people in my world men have, struggled with avoidant attachments, which is kind of another reason that falls into the category of intimacy. But it actually bases back to like evolutionary times where our life expectancy was quite short. And so if you mated with someone or partnered with them for survival, and then if they died, that became a threat to your safety or your life. And so partners would either not be as emotionally connected to them, because in case they died, they would be okay. It was like a protection mechanism. Or they would be like so connected, then if one died, it would like trigger like an anxious attachment. And so because the partner was no longer with him. And so there was like a worry of loss of partner, essentially. I know that's like a very basic, and I don't know what this like evolutionary time dates back to. It says it in the book. Like, I don't know if we're talking cavemen, but it was a time where we had like very short life expectancy. Like you like lived to be like 35, maybe if you were lucky and didn't eat like some poison berries or something. Like that's what we're talking. So it's a very interesting concept. Anyways, I'm just giving like random tidbits of places to yeah, just guide you and your partner to learn more about each other, because I do think that it feeds into having a well-rounded, juicy sex life when you understand these facets. Like your sex life is so much more than just like the physical act. It's very much so emotional and understanding each other's emotional scale and tonality. And yeah, so that book was attached. I'll link these in AG's book club. But it was really interesting because I realized a couple of things that I was like, oh, it was like a few scenarios in the book that I'm like, oh, I've definitely felt that way before, like even with a partner, or, and we'll have like inner teen moments or inner child moments where we're triggered in a relationship. Like our relationships are greatest teacher. So yes, you can be a secure attachment, but you can have moments where you bobble and like experience, like, oh, you're feeling kind of avoidant around this certain situation. But then now that you have awareness, you can quickly recalibrate back into that secure attachment place. So, yeah, just a really good book. And I thought it was very interesting. It's a super easy read, honestly. It gives a lot of, tangible examples and results. Okay. Obviously, I went really rogue on sex, but sex is probably like one of my favorite things to talk about just because I just feel like a lot of people struggle to talk about it. And I am fortunate that I don't struggle to talk about it, that I feel like I should talk about it more. But also, just so you guys know, like this has been an evolution. Like it's not like Austin and I came into like super conscious partnership and we like both love talking about all these things. Like I'm sure there are some things that I bring up that he's like, wish you wouldn't. But here's the thing. Somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to ask the questions or address it. And it forces him to be vulnerable. And that's, vulnerability it's imperative for growth. So I'm like, tough titty, Austin. Sorry. We're going to talk about it. Obviously, 3 is children. It's really quite simple. I think it's, do you want to have them or not? Also, how were you raised? What did that look like? What did you like? What do you want to take into raising children together? And what would you like to do differently? We're allowed to look at our experience and just really zoom out and be like, I had great parents who did the best they could. I love them so much. We don't have to be judgmental, but I probably would do some of these big things differently. And that's okay. I really do feel like children that's so much inner child mirroring for us. Like it is like the ultimate inner child healing having children, because we're connecting with our 8-year-old essence when, they're 8 or 4 or whatever, and just really going back in and being so loving to yourself with, whatever stage of life that your child is in, having a lot of compassion for you and also your parents who, I saw a quote the other day that was like, you got to remember, don't be too mean to your parents because it's their first time living too. It's their first time doing this. Just because they're your parents doesn't mean they know everything and they've experienced everything that you've experienced. We're all having very different experiences, and that's taken a lot of pressure off of my relationship with my family as well. Like I don't, feel victimized by something that maybe I wish was differently, or, I wish I'd experienced differently, because I'm like, everyone was just doing the best they could. So, but I really do think that having those conversations around children, when do we want to have them? What age range? How many? Granted, some of it's going to change. Like one day you're just going to wake up and feel really called to it. Austin and I have just always gone into it being very open-minded. We do not feel called to having children at this time. This current time, we want them, but just not right now. We want to get married first. The wedding's still many months away. So, and also we're like full-time raising a 12-year-old. So we're kind of in a season of homework and writing research papers. Actually, Zane's about to be 13. He's gonna be a teenager. He's like so big. So, we're just in a different phase of life. That's why we're not actively trying to have them right now, but we're very on the same page that, whenever we kind of have like a few little like timeline check marks in our head that we're like very much aligned with. And we feel like that would be a good time for us to explore children. So I think, we have don't have like a set in stone plan, and obviously you can't, because that's also up to God, but we have a understanding that we're just like meeting in the middle. We're like, yeah, that feels good to me. That feels good to you. When we feel called, like it's our time, then God willing, let's go. So I think it's just another thing. Like, I remember the first time Austin and I were playing that card game, We Are Not Really Strangers. And we were in Antigua, and it was the first time that it was like I pulled a card. It was like, what do you want to have children? And it's just like one of those things that when you're first dating someone, you don't just like, I mean, some people do, but I was never the type to be like, what are your thoughts on having more kids? Because obviously he already has a son. And it's just like I said, these are not typical questions that may come up in every single day, but we had been dating for like 6 months at the time. And I remember I pulled that card. I was like, what are your thoughts on having more kids? And I was like, oh, we're going there. But really good information. And he's just always been like, I'm so open to exploring that with you. And he's kind of like, I don't know what it looks like. Like, I don't know if I'm like, I want, one more or three more, but I know that whatever you want is what I want. I'm like, great. Okay. And who knows, he could feel way more strongly, but I know that we are on the same team with that so deeply that that's not an area that I'm worried about. I just kind of know it'll unravel. But I think, like I said, a good question to ask. And then, okay, in-laws. That is a really good one to kind of goes into the category of boundaries. I definitely have some friends that have in-laws with literally the craziest of non-existent boundaries. And that is very hard. It's a hard dynamic, especially, you know, I, again, I'm speaking from my experience with just people in my life or family members. I feel like it is difficult with men because the male mother dynamic is the trickiest when it comes to getting married and there's like another woman in the picture and the mom feels like replaced. I don't think that's like, I say that with air quotes, replaced. I don't think that's like actually how it is, but I do think it is a trickier dynamic to understand. And it's just kind of that mama bear energy. However, like for me, my parents were like freaking couldn't be happier. Like they were so ready for me to get married. Austin, alas, we'll serve her up on a silver platter. Take her. um, so I guess it depends on how protective your parents are. Of course, there are still going to be things like the major stuff, like what are we going to do about holidays? Your parents or my parents or in-laws, and I would just say the best piece of advice that I can give you, because I don't have all the answers on in-laws, and Austin and I are fortunate that we have a good situation, but we've also had to have hard conversations with both of our families. Like, do not get it twisted, uncomfortable conversations around just boundaries at times. And I really do think that if you are having a problem with your partner or significant other, calling your mom, calling your sister, calling someone to vent and talk shit about them is probably the worst thing that you can do. And I know it sounds comfortable because you're like, they're my family, they get it, they whatever. But we don't want to always just bring our family in on like all the negative parts of our relationship, because everyone's going to have rough spots or tough moments. And I'm like, if you could, reserve that maybe for a friend or a therapist, a counselor. Like sometimes I'll tell my therapist, I'm like, honestly, I just want to complain and not feel guilty. Can I just complain? This isn't about Austin, just about anything. Just have like a space where you can complain and then move on. Because I find that has been really like Austin and I, like I never, ever, 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 like if we have a fight, like I am not turning to my family to bring them in on the situation. Or like, I would never complain about Austin to his parents. I think that's like a really good, just kind of like, just the best advice that I could give you is we don't want to be bringing our family in on our private business that like in 2 days we're going to be over, and then your family's going to be harboring it for like 3 months and be like, well, remember that one time you called me and you were really upset? It just, yeah, unless, I don't know, you could be an anomaly and have a family that's just like bounce back rate is quick. My mom forgets nothing. She literally saw someone like the other day and was like, I'll never forgive that girl for being mean to you in the 6th grade. I'm like, Mom, I like literally don't remember. I'm not bothered. I'm not upset. Like, let's forgive and forget and move on. And Mom's like, can't. And I do know as a parent, it is hard when someone is rude to your child or whatever, but that's my best advice is that your private business, even if it's a fight, even if it's something, I would say keep it between the two of you. Write it in your journal. Call your bestie, or really maybe a counselor or a therapist, and just like unload and then just like move on with it. And sometimes I had a friend that said that she'll just like rant into her phone, into a voice memo, just to like talk and just like verbally dump and process. Love that too. But I would say, yeah, Austin and I do not involve our family in any of our private business matters, arguments. Like, we don't. Um, yeah. And I think that it's kept everything pretty neat and tidy. Besides, we just the only like I would say boundary things are just like scheduling and where we're going to be for certain events with certain family members. I mean, that's just kind of normal stuff that's going to come up. But I will say that I feel really fortunate that he is like very much so stepped into the marriage role of, you know, me and Zane are his family, and that's like his number one priority. And that makes me feel really, like, I guess, taken care of. I don't even know what word I'm trying to say. He never puts pressure on me to, do something that, like, because his family did it this way. He's like very open for us creating our own unique dynamic together, which is taking the pressure off because, like I said, we have different upbringings and different backgrounds. And I think that's just normal. Some people might just want it to be a certain way because they were raised that way. And you're like, hey, actually, let's do our own thing, like let's see what feels good for us and find our own rhythm and flow. So I touched on this one actually a little bit recently. Podcast episode, I think it's like 72. I'm probably off by a number or so, but it's basically like how to navigate relationships after a spiritual awakening, because you go through a spiritual awakening, you're like, this is a whole new world. And wow, everything is like so sparkly and manifestation is real and cool and signs and butterflies. And then you look around and you realize that there are a lot of people who are not in that headspace, and you're like, oh, but then you want to like bring them into that headspace with you. And you're also like, wait, they're on their own journey. I can't. I got to just like live in my own little life of bliss. So I feel like that's how I could see, religion being a really big one, mostly in the fact of like, when you get married, like, are you going to get married in the church? How are you going to raise the children? Like, those are all conversations that are worth having, because some people are really passionate about being raised in the same way they were raised. Some people are super open and don't care at all. Just a great place to just be like, hey, just going to go ahead and put the finger in the boiling hot water and check the temperature. Where are we at? Because curious, have you even thought about this? And again, like I said, these aren't questions that come up every single day, but I touched on this already. But I will say that, Austin and I come from different religious backgrounds, and I am someone who's very all encompassing of God, whether it's religion or spirituality. Like, I'm so rooted in my relationship now. Like, I just understand my faith so deeply. And, I think Austin is the same way. Like, he has a very strong relationship with God. He is really like open to, I think he grew up with like a more of like a strict Baptist background. But I think that he's kind of redefined that. Like, the church, if we go to church on Sundays, we don't always go, but sometimes we do, because Zane also is in youth group. It's a non-denominational church. So we're not like super tethered to like labeling. And that's kind of where I just stay away from like harsh labeling, because I'm not trying to label myself as something different than someone else. You know what I mean? I feel like that kind of creates separation. So yeah, I would say our perspective is that we just are continuing to be on our own spiritual journey, and we encourage each other to explore whatever we feel called to. I let him be him. He lets me be me. We're not getting married in the church. I almost told you where I was getting married. Sorry, that's a secret. Whoops. But, and like, my sister got married in the Catholic Church, but I'm not, and that's okay. Like, Austin was totally like, yeah, that's how I feel too. Like, I want it to be really intimate and special, and it's going to be like really connected to nature. And so that's kind of, what's lighting us up the most these days. And in terms of, how we're going to raise our children, like, we don't know yet. And the cool thing is that I do know that we both have a very open-minded approach to it. So I think it would be different if your partner is like, well, it really needs to look this way and only this way. That's when you need to like, dive into the conversation a little deeper and be like, well, maybe I had this experience that I wish I hadn't had. And, is there any way we could reshape this to approach, the topic of religion from a different angle, because I think that there are some people who have beautiful experiences in religion. There's some people who have very harmful experiences. And I think that your partner needs to know if you have had an experience that makes you feel uncomfortable, or if you've been harmed by religion in any way, because that's also very common. And not to be ashamed of it, but just let them know for their own information. That's like this whole purpose of going through these things, is to let your partner know some things that they don't know about you. So like they're going to be like, well, why are you feeling this way? And it's like, you've got to kind of lead them there and let them know, this is how I'm feeling and this was my experience, and I maybe don't wish that experience for my children, or it was a beautiful experience and I hope my children enjoy and savor every second of that. And how can we recreate something that feels this comfy and cozy and yummy? And yeah, I think that's about covers religion. I know this is kind of like a long-winded, just chit-chatty, but I hope this has at least sparked something creatively or intuitively for you to discuss with your partner. And remember, you can always let me be your guinea pig and blame it on me. Be like, Anna Grace made me ask you these questions. um, and then also, I think just like some other ones as you enter marriage, like what are your expectations for marriage? And also, like, I really do feel like Austin and I's relationship is going to change a lot in a really good way, even though every time I say that, he's like, it's not going to change. Our relationship's so good. I don't want it to change. I'm like, okay, but change is a good thing. I think that's also like a very man thing. He's like very in the present. He's like, I don't want it to change. It's so good right now. And I'm like, yeah, but it's going to get even better. Yay. Yeah. I think, just being as open and honest, and even just having some of these questions in your arsenal gets you in the practice of being more communicative, because even that for me has been I would say the biggest practice for me has been expressing my needs, and same with Austin, and whatever that is, like asking for help. Literally any need that we have, because we're both such independent people, and it's kind of been like a practice of breaking down those walls and being like, actually, I should have said this sooner, but I'm needing, you to do this, blah, 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 or I'm needing support in this area, or I'm needing nurturing in this area, or I need, some type of comfort in this realm of intimacy. Like, I do think there is just something so vulnerable and powerful in, one, the energetic of expressing your needs, being unafraid to speak your mind and speak what it is, and then also allowing that person to receive and hold that space. Like, that is true, divine partnership right there at its essence. And that's a practice. And, even just listening to this podcast, now you have a new lens of which to approach relationship. And yeah, I wish all of the happiness for any future brides and success in your marriage. And also, I mean, for anybody listening that isn't even in partnership yet, these are just good things to know entering in, because you don't want to be blindsided when you're getting married and you guys disagree on 3 different things and you're like, whoa, I wish we had talked about that sooner. Like, I do think pre-marriage counseling is really cool. I try to talk Austin into it, but he's like, you are basically a marriage counselor. You ask so many questions. I'm like, yeah, it's true. I feel like I've gotten a pretty good, well-rounded approach on asking a lot of understanding, or asking a lot and understanding his perspective. And, but also taking the pressure off. If your partner doesn't have an answer right now, that's okay. You guys are just both open to learning more and staying committed to one another. And that's all that you can ask for. So we're not shooting for perfection or like the perfect answer, the perfect response. Most of these are going to be kind of messy or confusing or vulnerable, but they're so worth having. So worth having. Don't wait until you wake up one day and you're like, I don't know anything about what you think about X, Y, and Z, just because it was an uncomfortable topic or something that you didn't want to avoid. I'm someone that's like, we have come from generations of people that love to sweep shit under the rug. And I'm like, no. I want to lift the rug up. I want to look around. I want to take a flashlight and I want to clean it up. So this is your call. This is your permission slip, and maybe some homework for you. Or you could even start, if you're still in a season of singleness, journal on these things. Get really clear on what you think about all of these things, because that's even better. If you get clear on them now before you have another person that you're trying to do a dance around and try to figure them out too, like figure yourself out. Like, this episode, I really feel like is just all encompassing. good to know about yourself, because ultimately we want to have this deep, intimate relationship with ourselves first before we can give ourselves to another person in a divine union partnership situation. So, like I said, come one, come all, anybody who wants to experience a very soul nourishing love and is preparing for longevity with that relationship, these are good topics to touch on. So, thank you guys for coming to class. I hope this has been helpful. I try to share as much as I can in my own personal relationship without just like exposing all of Austin's business. I try to keep some level of integrity for his privacy because he didn't sign up for this. I did. I'm happy to share everything with you guys. But as always, thank you for coming to class. I love you so much. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. And I'm sending so much love to you and your significant other or the future partner that you are manifesting. Mwah. Bye. As always, I just wanted to say thank you so much for tuning in. If you feel so called or if it feels aligned, I would love for you to leave me a review here. I always love reading your beautiful thoughts and messages. And also you can find me at Anna Grace Newell on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And I will link all of my courses, AG University course curriculum in the show notes, along with if you're interested in booking an Akashic Records reading with me. My scheduling link goes out in my newsletter. It goes out once a month and it's completely free. I would love to have you there. As always, I'm a proud professor and you get an A+ for making it all the way through the end. Love you.